So this week in Jabba's court, we're talking The Acolyte. It's not been renewed for a second season on Disney Plus. Is that the right decision? And what impact does it have on the future of Star Wars and television? Because this is a show that, from its conception, has had an element of the fan base hating on it to the point that they were actually coming up with reasons why it hadn't been made, even whilst it had been filmed. Pulling up documents from Company's House that had been filed late as some kind of reason that it had never actually been filmed, and it was all just some big elaborate scheme to save money on tax. All sorts of weird and wonderful theories. We've had the talent involved, from the creative to the actors, getting abuse online. Before the show even aired, there was ratings on Rotten Tomato, dissing the show before people had even seen it, to criticism throughout, questioning whether the show was impacting on the lore of Star Wars, even when it really wasn't, and to the point that there was a huge part of the fandom never gave it a chance. And what we're seeing on the reverse is a big chunk of the fandom, especially, I think there's over 60,000 people signed a change.org petition to get it brought back. The people who enjoyed the show were really passionate about it, and so much hatred and angst and anger from all sides. You've got, a really repulsive part of the fandom who've been abusive about it from the beginning, celebrating its cancellation. I wouldn't celebrate anything Star Wars being cancelled, because even if I don't enjoy it, if someone else says, let them enjoy it.
Yeah.
And on the opposite side, you've got fans who this show meant a lot to them because of the diversity and the topics that it tackled. Was the first time that they felt represented by Star Wars on screen. And I just thought, overall, your impression of the Acolyte and the fact it's not been renewed, Paul, there's a lot there to digest.
Yeah, no, well introduced. The Acolyte, when it was coming up, was something that I wouldn't say that I was sort of like thinking, oh, I wish it had already been an air. Um, the fact that it's set so far out away from everything else, in a way, does mean that if they don't do anything else in that timeline, won't be that problematic, because it's set so far away from anything else, other than the fact that we saw a little glimpse of the back of Yoda's head right at the end of the series. If it didn't continue, it wouldn't be disruptive. I've got no issues if it wants if some of the characters that are in there come back in some form and get their own series. I mean, the main bad guy in that, I'm trying to think of his name. Mr. Newbold will pipe up.
Kima.
He was impressive. He was pretty menacing with that very sort of weird sort of version of Kylo Ren's mask,
Yeah.
effectively, with the zippy from Rainbow Teeth. Um, but the
Technically, it's
lights,
only really known as the Stranger.
the
So to get you off
stranger.
it, his Kemar was his sort of human-esque name, shall we say?
Yes,
His
that's it. Yeah,
Palpatine name is
his alter ego.
yeah.
Yeah, but the fact that there was some stunning lightsaber work in particularly in that one episode where much of the cast was offed anyway. So what would be expected from a second season of the Acolyte, I don't know, because there wasn't really a lot left to pursue other than the potential training of one or both of the twins. Um, there's nothing to say that those characters won't appear in something else. It just doesn't have to be linked or called the Acolyte. I've got no real issues with the show itself. It's just it was something that, because it was so detached from everything else, it wasn't a must see.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas we're so used to everything being interwoven in the Mandoverse, everything is of a similar timeline. And that's obviously been constructed in such a way that we could eventually end up similar as we've had with the Marvel universe, where all characters can play in the same production. Um, Whereas that would never be the case with the Acolyte anyway. It was always standing on its own. Um, and another argument that I heard from some people was that if it hadn't been attached to Star Wars but had come out in its own right, would it have been accepted by Star Wars fans more broadly? Because it wouldn't have been part of the Star Wars canon, and therefore would have been just sort of like some cool sort of show. They'd have replaced lightsabers with something else and Jedi as something else. But but I kind of understand that argument as well. Um, what were your thoughts on it? Were
Well,
you a fan of?
I'm gonna throw in a comment here from Mark Newbold there over on X. Let's bring this up a bit so we can see it. The politics was where it was starting to get interesting for me. Senator Riencourt in his speech with Finestra was fascinating, and yet I felt a little bit lost at the start of the season. It wasn't connecting with me. I didn't fall in love with some of the new characters that Yord, for example, that gained a huge fan base. I just didn't connect with those characters. So when they died, it didn't really impact me like it probably should have done in the show.
Yeah,
But as it
and
got to sort of episode 7, 8, and it started bringing in the politics, in 8, you've brought in Plagueis, you've brought in, well, we'll presume it's Yoda. I never saw his face. Could have been Grogu's dad. Could have been anyone. But we'll presume it was Yoda.
yeah,
That's where it was starting to get interesting for me. I kind of wanted something that, because it was kind of leading into the prequels. I know it's 100 years plus before that. The prequels was very political heavy. I kind of wanted something again like that. I wanted something showcasing the Jedi, very much like the prequels did, and we kind of got that. We got maybe one sort of big, interesting sort of Jedi fight. We saw a little bit of training going on. So we got little glimpses of that. And I kind of felt towards the end of the season, it was kind of going more in a direction that would appeal to me if it carried on for a second season. So I definitely feel there's a story there to be told. But for me, I understand the business side of it.
yeah,
As an accountant, I'm like the guy that brings the numbers to the board that gets things cancelled.
yeah,
I understand it. And when you look at the numbers of the Acolyte that are published, and there's some question marks over that, but Disney have all the numbers they could possibly want at their fingertips with it being on their streaming service. It didn't have the viewership. It didn't gain the viewership, and in fact, the sort of viewership kind of tailed off a little bit. And you can look at other shows like Andor, but Andor didn't have the viewership at the beginning, but it kind of grew. And even Andor was kind of affected as well because it was originally planned to be a 4 or 5 season show, and they've shortened it to 2 seasons, and they've changed the way they're telling the story in the second season to 3 episodes, accounting for a significant period of time.
Yeah.
So that's impacted as well. They've made decisions around that. Could they have done something with Acolyte? I don't know. I don't like the idea that the people have been so negative about and have run a campaign against it have this feeling that somehow they've achieved some kind of victory. That doesn't sit well with me.
No, I agree.
I genuinely don't think they have. I think Disney have made a business decision. But I think the way that they've handled announcing it, poor. And I actually think maybe the Acolyte as a project doesn't move forward. It doesn't necessarily mean that the characters in the storyline gets lost. Does it move to animation? Does it move to, comics or books? And we've already had some comics and books. We've got a comic on Kalnaka coming out this coming week, I think. And there is books in the pipeline as well. Do we carry the story on that way? Do you actually pivot and create another series called The Rise of Plagueis and just focus on him and have the other characters sort of peripheral to his story? So there's different things they can do. And I admire the people that have gone to the effort to building up 60,000 signatures on this petition. But what they really need is to get people to watch the show, because that's the
Do
numbers
you
that
think?
Disney are looking at.
Yeah. Do you think it would be? I don't know whether with it being cancelled, whether they'll ever get around to doing this. But I would have liked to have seen a cut of it that was more linear. So, we see the flashback episodes
Mm-hmm.
first. Let's see it run linear. I think a lot of people were quite miffed that Carrie Ann Moss's character got killed off in the first episode. I kind of figured that there would be at least some sort of flashback to her, but she was significantly in the show beyond that. But maybe if it had been released linear, then it would have made more sense and perhaps garnered more support.
Yeah,
Um, who
yeah. I
knows?
think when you mention support, I think that's what the people who love the show have to do, is get their friends to watch it. You know, if
Yeah,
you're in a family and you all got different profiles on the Disney Plus account, watch it on every profile. You
is that
know,
right?
watch it on repeat, go back to it, watch it again from the start. Disney look at all these numbers. Get your
Yeah,
friends to watch it, because let's say 1.7 million people watch The Acolyte. There's 100 million subscribers to Disney Plus. So it's reaching a tiny part of the audience. And it's the same for every Disney Plus show. It's attracting a tiny element of the audience. And so the more people that watch it, the more likely they are to make more of it or pivot and give it a new name. And it's similar characters in a similar vein, but it's maybe different
yeah.
showrunner will take it on and take it forward.
I also think, Brian, that there's an element of it where does everything have to contain Jedi? Some of the more successful elements of Star Wars aren't just focused on Jedi and Sith. Why not try something a bit different? The Mandalorian certainly early on didn't rely on anything to do with the Jedi, other than Grogu was potentially well, from the off was a Force wielder. But I've rewatched Mandalorian season 1 and season 2 many times. I can't see me doing that with the Acolyte.
Yeah,
It was okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I get that. It's the one thing that appealed to me, and I didn't think from the off it was a show that was necessarily targeted towards me to appeal to me.
Mm.
But the one thing that appealed to me was the fact that they made a question mark over the Jedi, and a lot of people didn't like this. But I like the fact that the question, the Jedi are supposed to be guardians of peace and justice. Who gets to decide what's a peaceful action and what is justice? And it's always the victors in wars who write the history. So it's nice to
Yeah.
actually look at the history happening and actually have question marks against it, because when you look back, and you can be the victors in a war, but when you look back in 100 years' time at what you did, question marks whether you did the right thing or not. And you just look at, we're sitting here in the British Isles, you can question a hell of a lot of what the British Empire's done around the
Oh,
world. Um,
yeah, yeah.
and the people today would have a completely different attitude to it than the people writing the history books 100 years ago would have. And that element kind of interested me, because we've always got this Jedi good, Sith bad, Jedi light side, Sith dark side.
Yeah.
What did Kimar do in this show that was necessarily evil? And actually look at it, what did the Jedi do in this show that was evil? And when you stack it up, you'll find more evil things on the Jedi side of things than you will on Kimar. And that kind of thing, that kind of balance was interesting to me. So
It
that was
it
a
all
bit,
it all it all comes down to what the spirit of Obi-Wan said in Return of the Jedi, a certain point of view.
yeah,
And that's what all conflicts are based on, aren't they? Nobody thinks of themselves as the bad guys, unless you're Mitchell and Webb when you realize when you were a Nazi, are we the bad guys? But other than that, nobody questions what they're doing. They think they're doing the right thing.
yeah.
Um, and that would have been true in the Acolyte of the Jedi, and then of the Stranger. They would have been thinking that what they were doing was for the good.
And it's the right thing to do. And a lot of people argue, oh, we can't call the Jedi grey or questionable or whatever. But you fast forward to the prequels, and Palpatine gets the approval of the Senate to execute Order 66 to kill off all the Jedi. So you have to think over that 100 years of time, enough people started to think bad things about the Jedi in order
Yeah.
for Palpatine to be given the approval to do the things that he did. Because this is the element that people always forget, and I always bring up. The Senate was in place right up until the beginning of A New Hope. So every questionable thing that Palpatine did, he did it with the approval of the Senate, and actually the Senate encouraging his actions in many ways. So the
Yeah, I'd
extermination
never
of the
thought.
Jedi was approved
Yeah.
by hundreds of planets all around the galaxy. Uh, and that is basically that is you see that play out in film, but people don't talk about it. What got them to the point that they thought, you know what, there is something slightly corrupt and wrong with that Jedi, and it just becomes little things built over time that makes you start questioning the role of the Jedi, and a lot of it can be the arrogance of it, and you see that a little bit in the Acolyte, in that we'll just come and take what kids we want, and we'll do what we want, and we're in charge, and we're right, and you're wrong, kind of thing. That people start having like a an attitude towards being dictated to by the Jedi, who have this power and this superiority, because it is effectively a religion. It's one religion dictating to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if
So
you're going to start a war, you may as well start it with religion or politics, haven't
it's
you? And
generally what happens.
Palpatine was steeped in both.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of themes in Acolyte that are very interesting and very relevant to explore. And that's where I would have went with it going forward. Make it very political. Bring in Yoda as the big gun. Bring in Plagueis. Really get to the meat of the story, because it felt like they were just picking away at the edges. And yeah, did it deserve a second season? Not based on the ratings. Would I like to see a second season? Yes, because of the potential of the storyline.
And for me, did it deserve a second season? Probably not, because I think it failed to land some pretty interesting ideas. When we saw Plagueis pop his head around the corner in that cave, I was rubbing my hands thinking, here we go, something good's going to happen now. And it nothing happened.
Yeah.
And because of that, for me, it's sort of like, that's just not good enough. Would I like to see something continue in that timeline? Yeah, why not?
Yeah. Last question before we move on. What impact does it have on the future of Star Wars and television? Does it have an impact, the cancellation or non-renewal? Because they never actually said they were ever going to do more series. So
Yeah.
whatever terminology you want to use for the fact they're not making any more, does the fact that they're not making any more, the fact that they've thrown a lot of money at this, they've tried something new characters, etc. Does it impact on what the future of Star Wars and television, do you believe?
I think it has gone very quiet, hasn't it? I mean, D23 that happened recently, there's normally some big Star Wars announcements though. I think I'm right in saying there wasn't any. um, um, but I think they're bargaining on Star Wars returning to the big screen for a little while. I think that the next step forward with TV will be a return to animation, and I'd like to see something final. Rather, at last, we will see Luke, Han, Leia recast, albeit in animation, and let's see a continuation from Return of the Jedi. There's that sort of 6 year gap before we get to the Mandalorian and that time period. So I'd like to see something play out in that 6 year sort of space. And I think that will reignite a lot of people's passion for Star Wars. I think that there's been so much negativity that even people who probably haven't seen any of the Disney Plus content, probably seen nothing, and they might not have even seen any of the sequel films, because they've seen the infighting that's been going on with the different viewpoints from um, different factions of the Star Wars fandom. They've just chipped in anyway without actually seeing anything. So I think there is generally a bit of a downer on Star Wars at the moment, so it needs something pretty sensational to bring it back. And I think I'm right in saying, you might be able to correct me, Brian, or anybody else who's watching. Obviously, there's the Mando and Grogu film in production. I believe there's another film that they were talking about that was untitled that came up a few weeks back. There was a slide or something that came up.
Yep. So there's the Ray film that's still
Yeah.
believed to be slated in there.
Yeah.
There's Dave Filoni getting his own film as well.
Yeah.
There's other films that have been getting worked on, but there's big question marks. With Sean Levy was supposed to be working on one, who obviously just did Deadpool and Wolverine.
Yeah.
And there's other ones, Taika Waititi. There's other ones. Ryan Johnson's got a trilogy in there. So there's lots apparently on the
What?
slate that I know, and a lot of these are believed to no longer be moving forward. So
Yeah, that's the problem.
James Mangold
I
obviously had his Dawn of the Jedi film as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot bubbling away there, and a lot believed to have sort of been disappeared. Rogue Squadron you can even throw in there as well as somewhere on a shelf, So
It's again, I'd love to see that. That's another area that was always big in the original days of Star Wars was X-wing pilots and Y-wing pilots. I'd love to see either a TV series or a film on that. No Jedi. Let's just, come on, let's have something in that galaxy where there's no Jedi for a change.
yep,
I'd love that. But I also think that the inverted commas failure of Solo at the box office, I think was misinterpreted as well.
yep.
That's a great film and deserves a sequel or a TV series spin-off. What's happened to the Lando film stroke series? Are we ever going to get that? And if so, please let Han Solo appear in that as well. But who knows? But I do think that there's a lot riding on one, two, maybe three films from Star Wars coming out on the big screen that will reignite the TV series.
Yeah,
What have we
there's
got there?
Mark just throwing one there. Rogue Squadron. He can't
Yeah.
spell. He's terrible. Editor in chief, what they call him. Rogue Squadron should be a TV series. So many spelling mistakes in that, Mr. Newbill. Kick-ass X-wing battles in the OT era. And on that note, making fun of Mark Newbill's spelling, we'll call an end to this week's segment for Jabba's Court. And Jabba's Court's part of Good Morning Tatooine, your weekly recap of all the latest Star Wars news, live streaming every Sunday at 9 p.m. in the UK. And it also releases a video on Fantatrax TV every Wednesday at 7 p.m.